A month ago, the local prosecutor's office had charged Crockett with misusing campaign funds. The investigation claimed she had spent $50,000 from her campaign on personal expenses, including renting a luxury apartment and taking international trips. The evidence rested on bank transfers and testimony from an unnamed campaign consultant. But to many in Dallas, the case reeked of political revenge. Crockett, known for her fight against corruption in the city council, had become a target for those whose schemes she had exposed. Judge Hill, a man with a shock of gray hair and a heavy gaze, rapped his gavel, demanding silence. His reputation was mixed. Some saw him as a strict enforcer of the law, while others whispered about his ties to local businessmen whose interests often aligned with his rulings. "Ms. Crockett," Hill began, his voice as dry as paper, "you are accused of embezzling funds entrusted to you by voters. Do you plead guilty?" Jasmine straightened, her gaze locked on the judge. She knew Hill wasn't presiding over this case by chance. His name had come up too many times in talks about fixing things for the city's powerful figures. "No, Your Honor," she replied, her voice calm but piercing. "I do not plead guilty because these charges are an attempt to discredit me for my work on behalf of the community." The room buzzed. Journalists scribbled every word, while the jury, 6 men and 6 women, ranging from retirees to office workers, listened intently. Hill frowned, his fingers tightening around the gavel. "Watch your words, Miss Crockett," he said, his tone sharp. "This court is no place for political speeches." "I'm not making speeches, Your Honor," Jasmine replied, her voice steady. "I'm only asking for justice. If there's evidence, I want to see it. If there isn't, this case shouldn't be in court." The prosecutor, Andrew Clayton, a man with thin lips and a smug smile, stood. He held a folder of documents. "Your Honor, we have bank statements confirming transfers from Ms. Crockett's campaign fund to an account tied to a company leasing upscale housing in downtown Dallas," he declared, handing the papers to an assistant. Additionally, a witness who worked on her campaign confirms these expenses were unrelated to campaign activities. Jasmine knew these statements were fabricated. Her attorney, David Raines, an older man with a piercing gaze, had already filed a motion to verify the documents, but Hill dismissed it, citing insufficient grounds. It was the first sign the judge wasn't playing fair. "Your Honor," David interjected, his voice calm but firm, "these statements haven't undergone independent verification. We demand access to the original bank records to confirm their authenticity." Hill leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. "Mr. Raines, I won't allow this process to be delayed by baseless motions," he snapped. "Prosecutor, proceed." Jasmine felt anger tighten in her chest, but she refused to let her emotions take over. She turned to the jury, her gaze open and sincere. "I've dedicated my life to serving the people of Dallas," she said. "Every cent of my campaign funds went to community projects, to supporting schools, to fighting injustice. These charges aren't just an attack on me. They're an attack on everyone who believes in integrity." One juror, an elderly woman with gray hair, gave a slight nod. Another, a man in a faded shirt, leaned forward, listening closely. Hill, however, looked unmoved. "Enough, Miss Crockett," he interrupted. "You'll have your chance to testify when the time comes." But Jasmine didn't back down. She knew silence meant defeat. "Your Honor, if this court won't let me defend myself, how can I trust its fairness?" she asked, her voice quiet, but each word ringing like a bell. The room fell silent. Even Clayton, preparing to continue, paused, glancing at her in surprise. Hill's lips tightened, his face reddening. "You're testing my patience," he said, his voice trembling with barely contained fury. "One more word, and I'll hold you in contempt." Jasmine looked him in the eye. She knew Hill wanted to intimidate her, but fear had long left her. Instead, she felt something else, a certainty that truth, however slow, would find its way. "I just want the truth to be heard," she said softly. Hill slammed his gavel. "1 hour recess," he declared, storming out of the room, his robe billowing behind him. As the judge disappeared through the door, the room erupted in whispers. Journalists rushed to their phones, sending updates to editors. Crockett supporters in the back rows exchanged approving glances. David placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did well," he said quietly. "But Hill won't back down easily. We need evidence and fast." Jasmine nodded, her eyes fixed on the judge's empty chair. "It's there, David," she said. "And we'll find it." Behind the scenes, a storm was brewing. As Jasmine prepared for the next day, her team received an anonymous letter with evidence linking Hill to the company behind the forged statements. If these documents were real, they could not only clear Crockett, but destroy the judge's career. The most dangerous phase lay ahead, proving that truth was stronger than power. The Dallas courtroom hummed like a beehive. The day after the tense confrontation with Judge Hill, the atmosphere grew even more charged. Journalists crowded the back rows, their laptops clicking as they captured every gesture and word. The jurors sat with taut faces, sensing the weight of the moment. The air smelled of coffee, paper, and a faint trace of someone's cologne, but the stifling heat only heightened the tension. Jasmine Crockett stood by the defense table, her gaze focused yet calm. She knew today could change everything. The previous evening, her team had received an anonymous package, a thick envelope left outside her attorney's office. Inside were documents, emails, bank transfers, and notes linking Judge Hill to Brightway Holdings, the company allegedly behind the false charges against Jasmine. If these held up, they could not only dismantle the case against her, but expose Hill's corruption. Judge Hill entered the courtroom with a stony expression. His eyes avoided Jasmine, but she noticed his hands nervously clutching a pen as he took a seat. He banged the gavel, and the room fell silent. "We resume the hearing," he announced, his voice unnaturally even. "Prosecutor Clayton, your move." Andrew Clayton, the prosecutor with thin lips and a cold stare, stood. He held new documents, which he claimed definitively prove Crockett's guilt. "Your Honor," he began, addressing the jury, "we've obtained additional statements showing that Ms. Crockett not only funneled funds for an apartment lease, but also paid for a trip to Miami unrelated to her campaign." Jasmine's chest tightened with anger, but she forced herself to breathe evenly. She knew these statements were another fabrication. Her attorney, David Raines, leaned toward her and whispered, "They're bluffing. We're ready." When Clayton finished, David stood, holding the folder of anonymous documents. His gray hair gleamed under the chandelier light, his voice as solid as granite. "Your Honor, the defense has evidence that not only questions the charges, but also the impartiality of this court," he said. The room buzzed, and Hill slammed his gavel, demanding silence. "Careful, Mr. Raines," Hill said, his eyes narrowing. "You're making serious accusations." "I'm not accusing your Honor," David replied, his tone calm but sharp. "I'm presenting facts. We have correspondence between Brightway Holdings and your longtime associate, Mr. Richard Hayes, indicating you received payments for services in cases tied to this company." The room erupted in whispers. Journalists scrambled to take notes, and jurors exchanged stunned glances. Hill sat motionless, his face paling, but he quickly composed himself. "This is absurd," he snapped. "You have no right to tarnish my reputation with baseless claims." Jasmine stood, her voice soft but piercing. "Your Honor, if these documents are baseless, let them be examined," she said. "If you have nothing to hide, why not allow an independent review?" One juror, an older man in a checkered shirt, nodded as if in agreement. Hill noticed the gesture, his fingers tightening around his pen. "Ms. Crockett, you don't run this courtroom," he shot back. "I won't let this hearing turn into a circus." "This isn't circus, Your Honor," Jasmine replied, her gaze unwavering. "This is a fight for truth. The people of Dallas deserve to know if their judge serves the law or those who pay." The room buzzed again, and Hill lost his patience. He slammed the gavel, so hard the sound echoed off the walls. "Enough," he barked. "Recess until tomorrow. Mr. Raines, submit these so-called documents to the clerk, and we'll review them." As Hill stormed out, Jasmine felt the tension in her shoulders ease slightly. She knew they'd hit a nerve. David placed a hand on her shoulder. "He's scared," he said quietly. "But that makes him dangerous. We need to be ready for anything." During the recess, Jasmine sat in a small witness room, clutching a glass of water. Her aide, Layla, burst in with a phone in hand, her eyes gleaming with excitement. "Jasmine, you won't believe this," she said, dropping into a chair. "One of our bank contacts just confirmed the transfers Clayton presented as evidence came from an account tied to Brightway Holdings. It's not your money, it's theirs." Jasmine set the glass down, her heart pounding. "So they fabricated the statements themselves?" she asked. Layla nodded. "Yes. And there's more. Our contact says Hill was receiving regular payments from this company through a shell firm. If we can prove this, his career is over." Jasmine took a deep breath. She knew this was a dangerous game. Hill had connections, and the people behind him wouldn't go down without a fight. "We need someone to testify," she said. Without a witness, they could dismiss the documents. Layla shook her head. "Our contact is scared. He says Hill could ruin him if he speaks out." Jasmine smiled, though it was a bitter smile. "Then we'll make it so he has nowhere to run," she said. "We'll make the truth speak." The next day, the courtroom was packed. Rumors about the documents had spread across the city, and a crowd of protesters outside chanted, "Justice for Jasmine." Hill entered with his head held high. But Jasmine noticed his hands trembling as he picked up the gavel. David Raines stood, holding copies of the documents. He addressed the jury, his voice calm but compelling. "Yesterday, we provided evidence suggesting a conflict of interest involving Judge Hill," he said. "Today, we have confirmation from a banking source that the transfers allegedly tied to Ms. Crockett were made by Brightway Holdings. We demand your recusal, Your Honor, and the transfer of this case to another judge." Hill's lips tightened. For a moment, it seemed he might explode, but he forced himself to speak. "These accusations are baseless," he said, his voice wavering. "I won't allow the defense to manipulate this court." Jasmine stood, her gaze direct and unrelenting. "Your Honor, if you're innocent, let the FBI examine these documents," she said. "Let them figure out who's behind these transfers. If you have nothing to fear, why oppose it?" The room froze. Jurors watched Hill, awaiting his response. Journalists stopped typing, their eyes fixed on the judge. Hill opened his mouth, but found no words. Finally, he slammed the gavel. "Hearing adjourned," he declared, rushing out. That evening, Jasmine's team sent copies of the documents to the FBI. 3 days later, Hill was arrested on suspicion of accepting bribes from Brightway Holdings and other companies. The case against Jasmine was dropped for lack of evidence, but she knew this was just the beginning. Standing before a crowd of supporters on the courthouse steps, she looked out at Dallas, the city she'd sworn to protect. Her victory was a small step, but it gave hope that truth would always find a way. The Dallas courtroom was packed, but the atmosphere had shifted. The tension had given way to anticipation, and the stifling air felt less oppressive. Journalists, who had followed Jasmine Crockett's case for months, sat with laptops ready, their faces a mix of impatience and triumph. Crockett supporters filled the back rows, holding signs that read "Truth wins" and "Jasmine is our voice." The scent of fresh espresso, brought in by a reporter from a nearby cafe, lingered, but it couldn't mask the sense that today, the city's history would change. Jasmine Crockett stood by the defense table, her gray suit impeccable, her gaze calm and confident. She was no longer the accused. Today, she was a witness in a new case against Judge Edward L. Hill, charged with accepting bribes and abusing his authority. The documents her team had sent to the FBI had sparked a chain reaction. Hill's arrest, searches of his office, and the exposure of a corruption network reaching Dallas's highest circles. Hill sat at the defendant's table, his gray hair disheveled, his eyes avoiding the jurors. Once an arrogant judge who ruled the courtroom with fear, He now looked like a man who had lost everything. His attorney, an older man with a nervous smile, tried to maintain composure, but even he knew the evidence against Hill was damning. Judge Anna Martin, who had replaced Hill, entered the courtroom. Her reputation was spotless, and that gave Jasmine hope that the truth would finally be heard. Martin banged the gavel, and the room fell silent. "The hearing in the case of Edward L. Hill continues," she announced, her voice clear and authoritative. "Prosecutor, call your next witness." The prosecutor, a young woman named Caitlin Ward, stood. Her movements were confident, her tone sharp. "We call Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett," she said. Jasmine stepped to the witness stand, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She swore to tell the truth, her hand lightly touching the Bible, but her gaze was fixed on the jury. She knew her words today would be not just testimony, but a voice for all those the system had tried to silence. "Ms. Crockett," Ward began, "please explain how you uncovered evidence of Mr. Hill's corrupt activities." Jasmine took a deep breath, her voice calm but compelling. "It started when I was charged with misusing campaign funds," she said. "I knew the accusations were false, but Judge Hill dismissed all our motions to verify the evidence. That pushed my team to dig deeper. We received an anonymous package with documents, emails, and bank transfers showing that Hill was receiving payments from Brightway Holdings through a shell company." The room buzzed, but Martin quickly restored silence. Ward handed the jury copies of the documents, emails where Hill promised to handle matters, in exchange for payments and statements confirming transfers to an account linked to his cousin. "Can you confirm these documents are authentic?" Ward asked. "We turned them over to the FBI," Jasmine replied. Their analysis confirmed the correspondence came from Hill's personal server, and the transfers matched his financial records. Hill's attorney, Mr. Green, stood, his voice trembling with desperation. "Ms. Crockett, you claim my client fabricated a case against you, but don't you have personal motives? You're known for clashing with local authorities. Couldn't you have used this situation to eliminate a political rival?" Jasmine looked directly at Green, her eyes gleaming. "Mr. Green, I fight injustice, not people," she said. "If Judge Hill was taking bribes, that's not my invention, it's the facts before you. I only did what I had to. I handed the evidence to those who could ensure justice." One juror, an elderly woman in glasses, nodded, her face showing respect. Hill lowered his head, his fingers nervously fidgeting with the table's edge. Ward turned back to Jasmine. "Is there anything else you'd like to add?" she asked. Jasmine faced the jury, her voice softer but deeper. "I'm not here for myself," she said. "I'm here for everyone who's ever felt the system was against them. If we let people like Hill buy justice, we lose everything we've fought for. I believe you'll make the right choice." The room erupted in applause, and Martin had to bang the gavel several times to restore order. Jasmine returned to her seat, her hands trembling with adrenaline. She knew her words had hit their mark. The following days of the hearing only confirmed what Jasmine already knew. The FBI called additional witnesses, including Hill's former aide, who admitted to helping conceal payments. Bank records, emails, and even legally recorded phone calls painted a clear picture. Hill had been taking bribes from Brightway Holdings and other companies for years to deliver favorable rulings. When the jury delivered its verdict, the room held its breath. The jury foreman, a middle-aged man with a stern face, stood. "We find Edward L. Hill guilty on all counts," he announced. The room exploded with cheers. Journalists rushed to the exits to break the news. Hill sat motionless, his eyes vacant. Martin banged the gavel. "Silence," she ordered. "Mr. Hill, for the totality of your crimes, I sentence you to 7 years in prison without the possibility of parole." Court adjourned. As Hill was led away in handcuffs, Jasmine felt a heavy weight lift from her shoulders. She had won, but the victory wasn't sweet. She knew the corruption they'd uncovered was only part of a larger system. That evening, Jasmine stood on the courthouse steps, surrounded by a crowd of supporters. The Dallas sky glowed golden with the sunset, and the air smelled of asphalt and hope. Microphones stretched toward her, but she spoke not for the cameras, but for the people. "Today, we showed that truth is stronger than money," she said, her voice ringing out. "But this is just the beginning. We'll keep fighting until everyone in this city has a right to justice." The crowd roared with applause. Layla, her aide, stood beside her, tears in her eyes. David Raines smiled, giving a slight nod. As Jasmine got into her car, she looked at the city through the window. Skyscrapers gleamed in the sunlight, and somewhere in the distance, evening Dallas hummed. She knew more battles lay ahead, but today she had given people hope. And that was enough to keep going.